Love, Simon is the 2018 film adaptation of Becky Albertalli's debut novel Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, and it's a movie notable not just for being the first gay teen romance to be released by a major studio, but for being a film that's about as often criticized for what it's not as for what it is. Simon was held to a bit of an impossible standard, a way to criticize media that I think we reserve specifically for queer media, where we hold against a work perceived and imagined failures based on it not living up to some expectation of being significantly more subversive than it ever promised to be. I was always frustrated by this. I was really attached to the idea of this book at all. I briefly owned a copy before the trailer came out, but I had given it to a younger queer friend of mine who I felt maybe needed it more, and I didn't end up picking up another copy until just this last year. I've always had an enormous soft spot, not just for Love, Simon, but for what it represents, and for how important I know that it would have been to me if I had been just a couple of years younger than I was at the time when it came out. So I always felt frustrated that there was hardly any time to take a victory lap over this movie existing before I had to see think pieces decrying Simon as too late, too little, too normative. Those are hard to get into without doing a full analysis of the movie, which is not going to happen in this video, but it might in a future one if you enjoy this. Let me know what you think down below. But I can't start with the movie because Simon, as I mentioned, was a book before it was ever the first gay teen movie to be widely released by a major studio. A book that was implicated in a lot of the sort of recycled talking points that people who participated in the discourse around it were all using. That Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, and by extension, its film adaptation, Love, Simon, was a gay movie for straight people. I got the chance for this video to speak to the author herself about this repeated allegation that the intended audience of Simon is actually straight audiences.
First of all, when I started my intended audience was like me on my laptop and maybe my kids one day. I'm like, if they need it, they'll know at least I wrote this. Never in a million years did I think it'd get published. When I wrote Simon, my older son was a baby. He was like 1, and I wrote it during his nap time. You maybe can hear him in the background. Anyway, he's about to turn 14. There's like that aspect of it. It was one of those, like, I'm going to give it one shot because I've always wanted to try to do it. So when I went into it, it's like there was no target audience. No part of me thought this book was going to get published or break through in any way, right? But when I think about kind of who the audience has always been, it is a little bit of a mindfuck sometimes because you do have people saying very confidently and with this kind of authority as if this is like a known fact that, oh yeah, it was written for straight audiences or the movie was made for straight people.
One of my big takeaways after leaving the theater was that it was made for straight people. I'm not placing any kind of moral value on what it means to have that je ne sais same love. I'm just pointing out what feels like a pretty inarguable conclusion to draw from Love, Simon, that it is a movie about gay people made for straight people.
It feels fabricated in a way to increase support of gay people among straight people.
People talking about it as if they were in those production meetings or something. And I'm like, I wasn't in them. Maybe you were. I don't know. I'm like, I wasn't in the production meetings, but I was in the room when the book was written. I was the only one in the room. I guess my kid sometimes, the baby. It's like unimaginable to like write a book about a queer kid and kind of have that specifically be intended for like straight audience. I mean, I will say, like, I am somebody who, like, I do welcome any audience, a whole bunch of the, like, early on, like, the straight audience. We're not calling ourselves straight anymore, there's that. But I would say from the beginning, it's like a lot of those like queer Tumblr kids too, especially in the like 2010s, that was maybe the core audience, the core like fandom. For me as the author, like I don't know who all is making up kind of the bulk of it. Like, I don't have sales statistics. I don't know if there's a way to know that, but I can tell you who I hear from, and it is almost always the queer kids. And then sometimes every once in a while you hear from somebody who's like, I'm a straight guy and I bought this for my girlfriend, but I just wanted to let you know I really enjoyed this book. like thank you. So it's for the queer kids and that one guy, right? Like, hope he's doing well. I bet he's not a straight guy anymore.
I bet he's not even a he anymore.
Well, that's the thing is, like, I believe so strongly, first of all, that we just have to, like, understand that we are not talking about concrete and separate categories of people. And, like, I know and I see people, like, kind of mocking this concept. They're like, oh, we can't criticize a queer book because, like, oh, the author, like, may come out as queer one day. And I'm like, no, first of all, you can criticize a book. There's a huge difference between criticizing a book, which you can and should do, right? And it is my job to, like, set boundaries around kind of what, like, I haven't been to Goodreads since 2017, right? But I do think there's a difference between kind of the broad population and the population of people who are engaging regularly with queer media, whether as readers, writers, or other kinds of queer art or whatever, you know? Which isn't to say that that is a group that is 100% queer people, for sure not. But I'm not gonna like draw those lines in Sharpie, you know? Like, I learned that lesson, and the biggest thing that I regret about all of my early interviews is like I felt like I owed that disclosure of my straightness. I felt like people were entitled to kind of have that information about my positionality with the book. It was in very good faith kind of speaking about it. Sometimes I'll see people defending me saying like, she never said she was straight, you just assumed that. I'm like, no, I said it like a lot because I was asked it a lot, you know? I regret that.
You might have already known this was a question Becky got asked a lot. As she wrote about in her eventual coming out essay in 2020, people sure did want answers she was not quite ready to provide about why she felt drawn, as a straight woman, to write a story about a gay teen boy.
I mean, it was like a hilarious progression where after a while I started to like not answer it, but I would do so in a very convoluted way where I was trying not to shame anybody for asking it. So I would have this way of answering where I would say like, I used to answer this question. I'm not going to answer it right now. I've kind of decided to move away from answering that, even though I very much understand where you're coming from and why you would want to know that. But, you know, what I've found is that kind of by placing the expectation of answering and kind of describing my sexuality, that actually puts kind of a burden on authors who may be closeted. Me saying all of this, giving this whole speech, not knowing that I was the closeted author I was protecting there. Like, I was the biggest fighter on the battlefield for my goddamn self, and I had no idea. I don't know. It was silly, you know? It was like dodo behavior.
That evolution and the way she would answer the question would eventually culminate in that coming out essay I referenced earlier. Becky wasn't straight at all. Though she didn't know it when she began writing queer YA, Becky is bisexual, and she would eventually come out as such in a Medium essay you can find linked in the description below.
Like, I cannot emphasize enough, completely oblivious. Like, I was not, like, I really thought I was, like, fighting the fight for the, like, hypothetical. I did not have any particular person in mind. I did not. But you know what? After I came out, turns out there was, you would not believe how many people I've heard of. That's, okay, this is the main thing, too, is that I know it seems like a lot of, like, emphasis on this kind of discourse that it's like, who are we really hurting here? It's like a handful of very privileged, successful authors, most of whom that you're thinking of are white. And like, that is, I do think, like, a valid point to consider, for sure. Like, for me, I was not in danger of getting kicked out of my home. There's so many privileges that kind of came along with my position. And also, I had written myself into a social circle full of queer people, right? The thing I come back to is I want people who are kind of figuring out this discourse to know kind of who the, like, ripple effects are reaching. It is so much bigger than the person at the center of it. Like, initially after I posted my essay and when I came out in 2020, I wish I'd like counted the number. It felt like endless DMs and emails and texts and stuff like that. It was definitely at least 100 just of people, even if I just count people within the industry, at every stage. And I still have people coming up to me at every book event. It'll be somebody in the signing line who's like, I'm querying my debut and I'm bi, I'm not out, and I kind of am like, all right, well, if the book gets picked up, then I'll start thinking about like what that looks like. But I have been following along everything that's been happening with you over the last decade, you know? People who are kind of seeing these conversations and taking them in are making decisions about kind of their own coming out process, kind of factoring you on the internet into their journey, which feels kind of invasive to me. And then you factor in most of the people who this is affecting are not in my position, you know? Like, we're talking about some very young authors entering the industry. We're talking about people who do not live in the US, people who live in the global majority, you know, people who live in all kinds of places, in all kinds of families, in all kinds of cultural contexts. We're also talking about a fair number of established authors of the range of genders who specifically don't go near their own queerness, like, in their writing. These are people that you watching this, if any people watching this, have probably heard of. They're not going to touch it because they either can't safely or they don't want to. They just don't want to have that conversation with the public, which cannot emphasize enough that is so valid. It is a really not fun conversation to have with the public, can confirm that.
And unfortunately, as Becky would certainly tell you herself, she is far from the only person to be forced into having this really unpleasant conversation with the public.
I don't know if people care about this. Like, maybe not everybody cares as much as I do about, like, I care like a whole lot about if I'm doing anything to make somebody feel like weird or unsafe. I will say, like, there are certain things that if I see you saying this in the discourse, even if you think I'll never see it, probably will. Like, this discourse shows up on my algorithm every time. But if I see you saying it, I'm not going to drag you and I'm not going to, like, hate you, but I'm not going to trust you. And for me right now, the big one is if I see you kind of joking around or implying that people are coming out disingenuously, oh, like, better be careful critiquing that book or they might come out as bi, as if that makes it okay. And I'm like, okay, like, I understand that you're frustrated because you feel like this is stifling your ability to critique. Maybe you don't think everybody's being sincere. I can't speak for everybody. I would assume that people who are coming out are doing so. Like, I would default to assuming they're sincere. Like, for me, it was, like, agonizing. Like, you know, I am 43. I grew up in Georgia. I didn't have social media as a teen. Like, I didn't quite have what I have now accessible to figure things. It didn't occur to me to even explore that. Like, it was just my worldview. Somebody like me, it was, like, easy enough to not look at it in the face. But it didn't go away. Like, I'm sitting there volunteering constantly with queer kids, and I, became a full-on psychologist specializing in, like, affirming work with queer clients. My dissertation was, like, on, like, affirming work with queer clients. I loved queer media. Like, for me, like, the best way I think to explain it is that, like, I saw Bend It Like Beckham a bazillion times, and that, like, friendship between them and them being straight made perfect sense. Like, it was like this long road of, like, figuring it out. And, in some ways it was the most basic thing in the world. It was 2020 and I had a TikTok algorithm, and, like, that, it's, like, far from a rare story, for one thing. My TikTok algorithm does not think I'm for straight people. Has never doubted me. I have a burner account. It's, like, gay stuff and then a lot of animals, and then sometimes, like, doom stuff about Mount Everest. I'm scared of Mount Everest. Yeah, so I guess those are not, like, specifically gay, but the rest of my algorithm was. Yeah, I don't know. How do you explain that you're being sincere about your identity, Like, I don't know. I came out to my family. So I came out to sort of family, inner circle friends and stuff a little bit before I posted my essay, and I actually used my essay before it was public to come out. First, I showed them an essay written by another author, Jillian Morshady. I tag her in my coming out essay because her essay was so, like, it was like, so, her experience was so similar to mine, beat by beat almost, that it was like, I could not look away. I finally could not look away. It, like, clicked. So I actually came out by giving my family, first I had them read that, and then I had them read mine. And I had my order that I did it in. Easy people like my sister first, we worked our way up to my dad, the jokester. The shorthand for who my dad is Simon's dad remains the closest I've ever come to capturing a real person in my life in a character. My dad is Simon's dad. He does feel very represented by Josh Duhamel. He is a balding Jewish lawyer, but he's very representative.
I'll try to limit the amount of times I say outright in this video how much I adore Becky, but wow, I really love Becky. And I imagine her story might feel familiar, either because you might resonate with that feeling of being a really intense ally and not understanding where your strong convictions are coming from exactly, or maybe because you've heard parts of this story before.
I could speak for hours about how much I love Becky. She is one of the nicest people I've ever met. She's one of the people that makes me not hate the internet. She's an author who got hate on the internet, and I'm a YouTube book reviewer who talked about her on the internet, and now we're friends. She's the best thing that's ever come out of the internet for me. There was the whole fiasco in 2020 where people kept accusing her of being a straight woman writing gay books, and that pressured her out of the closet. And I was just I knew this was going to happen to somebody one day, because it was always bothering me that people would keep trying to demand personal information about authors, because there had also recently been a whole scandal about an author who had written a story with really graphic sexual assault scenes in it, and then people got mad at her saying she did a bad job and she was being exploitative, but then she came out and said she'd actually been sexually assaulted before in the story. So it's authors don't owe you that. You can judge the book by the quality of the book, and if you think the book has bad representation or it didn't resonate with you in your review, that's well within your right to say that. You're entitled to that opinion, but what you're not entitled to do is start bashing the author as a person as if you know everything about their own personal life.
When your criticism is kind of focused on the identity of the author, it gets a little jumbled, right? Because sometimes you will say something like, this thing that I observed that I didn't like in the text for this literary related, a book criticism kind of thing. And that's how you can tell that the author is straight. So it kind of, goes back and forth, and it gets really murky. It's very weird to receive feedback like that while questioning in particular, because you're especially if you're somebody like me, whereas I was I'm straight and I defer to queer people on queerness. Who am I to speak over this queer person who says that you can tell I'm straight from my book, And
at the time, this was hitting me really hard because throughout my 20s, I was always questioning whether I was non-binary, which I still might be. I have no idea. I'll worry about that when we're not in a fascist takeover. But at the time, I was trying to write non-binary characters, and I was oh shit, is somebody gonna demand something of me? So I was just scared that it could happen to me, and I was no, I need to stand up against this when it happens, because it's not just me it could happen to, it could happen to anybody. It could happen to any author who's not ready to talk about something in their personal life. The whole point of this book, Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, was don't pressure people out of the closet before they're ready. And so I'm do you have no reading comprehension?
I've spent a lot of time wondering about the reading comprehension of your average Simon hater. One of the first things I was most excited to tell Becky was that, contrary to the way that a lot of people have spoken about this book and speak about you, even if I hadn't heard any of the discourse that surrounded Simon, I think it would have been pretty obvious to me that this book was written by one of us. One of the things that made the hot take economy that sprung up around Simon so baffling to me in retrospect is that this book is just radioactive with bisexual vibes. I know you didn't know at the time, but it comes through very clearly when I'm reading it now.
It's funny because when I go back and read it, it's so obvious to me that it's almost embarrassing. Things that I wrote in 2013, I wrote those things. It's they're screaming. It's kind of this earlier version of myself is screaming through the pages, and I missed it. It's truly a spectacular level of obliviousness. I do feel many of us are oblivious. Not all of us write the Love Simon book and a bunch of other queer books before figuring it out. I don't know to what extent it is because I have the context now of understanding that, and I don't know, coming from the outside, I do think people who pick up the books now are more likely to think it was written by a queer person than somebody who picks up the books knowing that I am straight, And to me, that's part of why I don't touch that discourse anymore. I don't care if somebody's out there openly straight. I don't think openly straight is a real concept, because if you're out there saying you're straight, that could mean that you're straight. It could mean that you are closeted. It could mean that you don't even know you're closeted. Do you mind if I pause and shut my door? I can also, I guarantee you, we are certainly going to have at least one other visitor here. Like my cat will be here at some point, but I also know that that is encouraged on this channel.
Yes,
That's my
absolutely it
understanding.
is.
So, anyway, I love hearing that the vibes in the book were bisexual. It feels, I mean, it's validating for one thing, but that feels true to me. Like when I look back and read it, for a very long time it is disorienting to kind of have the book read differently than that to people. It is very hard to kind of believe in your own queerness when other people can tell or feel that they can tell from this very personal piece of writing that is in the world, landing differently with every reader, as all books do. What's so interesting is you end up with these like kind of two layers processing these experiences where, you can have these memories and then you like look back, through the lens of your own current understanding. And it's very interesting. I had very specific kind of random crushes, usually on somebody who was like in my life in some capacity who I didn't know. I feel like I'm a little bit outside the norm among like sapphic kids for this because, I don't, to the best of my recollection or understanding, like I don't think I had that with my close friends. And what's so interesting when I look back, I can pinpoint exactly who the crushes were, even though I had no concept of them being crushes at the time. But I can tell you, this girl from dance class, this girl from summer camp. It's like certainty now, looking back. And it was immediate certainty once I figured out, oh, there was a crush. And I'm like, oh, yes, that was like very different from it. And like, to me, it was, preoccupation kind of. Although it's still like, I had tried to like describe that feeling, I think probably in my essay or maybe in some of I think it was in my essay.
It was. Becky wrote, but if I rewind further, I'm pretty sure I've had crushes on boys and girls for most of my life. I just didn't realize the girl crushes were crushes. Every so often, I'd feel this sort of pull towards some girl I vaguely knew from school or camp or after-school dance class. I'd be a little preoccupied for a few weeks with how cool or cute or interesting she was and how much I wanted to be her friend. It just never occurred to me that these feelings were attraction.
There were kind of a sort of a group of people who I think they're like turfy, kind of like a bunch of enlightened centrist sort of podcaster clique kind of, who were, just mocking that particular part of they're like, that's called friendship, but like, that's not a crush, and, at the time, I again, in good faith, being as like true to my understanding of my experiences as I could possibly be in 2020, I was like, I usually like boys, but then sometimes I was like preoccupied by certain girls, like, 6 years later, like, the State of the Union is like, I am not, I'm not like 95-5. I am not 90-10. I am like, I'm very much closer to the middle probably, but like, all you can do is sort of try to explain yourself honestly and sincerely. And because like the way you word it is going to land differently with different people based on their own experiences and their own lens. And it was like, hearing kind of this interpretation of what I had said and be like, buddy, like that's French, like that's just called like you like somebody want to be friends with them. I was like, oh shit, like did I just like come out for no reason? Like, I'm like, did I just want to be friends, and it's like, I don't know, it's in such a raw place and it felt like I was sort of, putting this out there and then every single person got to weigh in on kind of how convincing it sounded, whether or not this read as a real queer experience. And I think to a lot of people it did, but to some people it certainly didn't. And it is a lot of the trauma of that experience, I think, comes from, just the overload of kind of hearing people's reactions and people kind of processing my experience, understanding my own attraction, and to them it didn't land as attraction. Now I feel a lot more confident in it. Like now it's pretty, like, I don't know. Y'all should see my algorithm, unless you're squeamish about Everest,
Unfortunately, as Becky would tell you herself, she is far from the only person to go through this sort of gay means testing.
I have seen trolls in the mix, but I don't think it's mostly trolls having this discourse. I think it's, some complicated conversations kind of among queer people who are all coming from a range of different experiences, who are kind of abiding by certain discourse norms, like conversational norms that change over time. Like, the most shocking thing to me, or the most remarkable thing, and it's very bittersweet to say this, it bothers me that this had to happen, but like the difference in the conversation pre-Kit Connor and post-Kit Connor, Halloween, whichever year that was, 2022, I don't know, I cried. I was like, I sat there staring at my phone when I saw that, like Kit Connor.
Kit Connor and Joe Locke were kind of obsessively stalked all summer, and people within the fandom began to get really, really obsessed with them both. They're both pretty young. I think when Heartstopper was being filmed, they were around 16. They're about 18 now. And because they are playing queer characters, there has been an obsession, both within the fandom and within media spaces that are run by adults, which is kind of scary. There's been an obsession with trying to get either of them to discuss their own sexuality. Both of them have been like, please don't ask those questions. We're teenagers, it's none of your business, and we are actors, which I think is a reasonable and well thought out response, and that has been very much ignored. So these discussions around Kit's queerness, potential or otherwise, made their way to him and affected him enough that he left Twitter. He also mentioned it in a few interviews about how he really didn't feel comfortable having these conversations. He came back to Twitter a few weeks later to announce that he is in fact bi, and he has very much felt like he was forced out by this situation because he has been asked to justify his involvement in a queer show, and it has created excessive media hype that has essentially backed him into a corner.
Here's what he tweeted. Back for a minute. I'm bi. Congrats for forcing an 18-year-old to out himself. I think that some of you missed the point of the show. Bye. I felt so bad for him because he was a teenager. Like, I wasn't out as a teenager, and you're expecting a teenager to be out, and like, what? Like, if a teenager is ready to come out, that's great. Like, good for them, but we shouldn't expect that of every teenager. That's ridiculous.
And it's this vicious cycle again. People bully bi kids. Bi kids don't want to say they're bi. Cycle, 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 cycle. The concept of queerbaiting in real life doesn't really affect queer people as a whole. It doesn't affect gay and lesbian people. It is very much an issue for people who are bisexual. People accused Kit Connor of queerbaiting because he held a woman's hand, and that in itself is a very, very clear indication of biphobia. Monosexual gay people do not like that the things they view as straight could be viewed as gay. This entire situation just tells me that a lot of queer kids, because that's the audience for the show, that's the people that have forced a fellow kid out of the closet, still don't think bisexual people are queer. It's very much assumed that bi people must perform to a specific set of gay standards that they don't have access to in order to be considered accepted into their own community. And again, that is the trick. There is no passing the test. And I need other bi people to know this. If gay people want you to pass a test to be allowed to hang out with them, they don't want you to hang out with them in the first place. Bi people don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to be a particular type of gay or straight to require acceptance, because bisexuality is its own unique identity. And within bisexuality, there is an endless list of things you could be, including being an 18-year-old bisexual boy who holds hands with a girl.
I think maybe it's because he was so young that people started to feel the sympathy, because like when it's these authors who you're already like in your 30s and have a solid career, people just like, especially because like, I'm not going to say all this discourse is driven by teenagers because it's not exclusively, but I think a lot of people who are like get very in depth in these online communities grew up with the internet more, and it feels more normal to be doing this on the internet all the time. So I think that like when you see someone who's closer to your own age who might be going through more of what you and people you know are, and you see it happen to them, it might hit closer to home. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like people were just like, oh shit, we did this to basically a kid.
We need more young, out, healthy, happy bi role models, and this is not how we create them. This is how we create shame. And a lot of this is in-house. A lot of this is gay on fucking gay crime. Situations like this are so bloody triggering because they are proof that gay people see bi people as a heterosexual threat or a heterosexual fraud. That's my cat aggressively scratching.
And that, there are people who kind of November 1st would say things in the discourse that were now unacceptable because Kit Connor came out and people had this different perspective. And I definitely understand that none of us has the ability to kind of see the future and kind of see where this is. Like, I did not understand when I was saying I was straight in interviews, kind of what road I was sitting myself down and what confusion and pain and how hard that would make things for me later, I give a lot of grace for that. I do not give grace to the people who are actively harassing Kit Connor. I'm more talking about the people who are just talking about it in this certain way that didn't make space for the possibility that Kit Connor could be closeted, right?
I know that when it comes to the reason I was bringing it up is like misogyny was that I've noticed that in the book world. I will say in the world of actors, men do get it just as bad.
That happened at such a scale and at such a moment that it changed the discourse, I think, very quickly, much more dramatically than after I came out, and more dramatically than any of the other ones that I have seen, at least from kind of my standpoint and kind of the information that shows up in my algorithm, which is biased and limited.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. He's young, I think, was also part of it. Like, he's so young. Also, being an actor in, like, a television project, I feel like that makes somebody that people would be more familiar with compared to, like, people who know books might know if they're, like, specifically in, like, attuned to the queer YA.
No, but there are magnitudes of virality that, like, are relevant with TV and film that just, I know, I explain this to people in real life are like, you're famous. And I'm like, no, like, okay, here's like the places that I would get recognized are a book event where I am a featured speaker, a place like a school where I have previously presented or something, like I'm like, author famous is not famous, It is the scale of feedback that he would have gotten. I do not know him and I've never spoken with him. I am a fan, but like, I can't even imagine how much input there was leading up to him coming out and then in the week of it and the discussion and everything. Like it's the level of, and then I think about like Billie Eilish, Harry Styles is at the center of a lot of this. Like, I don't know. The other thing we do is when somebody comes out, they kind of get reshuffled into one of the good. I saw that happen with me where it was like, well, Becky's okay. She is actually queer. Why are we coming after Becky Albertalli, who's actually queer, when we could be coming after whoever it is? And then they come out a year or two later sometimes, and then it's like, well, what about, like, why are we coming after Becky Albertalli when we could be coming after Taylor Jenkins Reid? Well, lo and behold, lo and behold. like,
There are any number of other figures that this conversation applies to really heavily, some of whom we get into in this video and some of whom we don't. An obvious example, though, given recent discourse in 2026, would be heated rivalry. I made a video back in February defending both the right of women in the audience to enjoy the show and also the right of the assumedly cisgender woman who wrote the books the show were based on to explore whatever she might want to explore in her fiction. This doesn't make the contents of the books themselves immune from criticism, so long as that criticism is not, she should not have been allowed to write this because she has a husband, or if she would like to write this while having a husband, she needs to disclose her identity to us and let us scrutinize it. If you're agreeing at all that this is something to get mad at, I don't understand where we're coming from, especially like with the Kit Connor thing. It's such a similar thing of like, I think we're seeing this with the guys from Heated Rivalry as well, of like,
oh my God,
are they allowed to be here? Are they allowed to be doing this? Is there somebody else who has been doing this thing that we think is bad that we can point to instead and try to like direct this anger at, rather than like interrogating that that's not a conversation that's like useful to be having. The conversation that's useful to be having is like, again, are they being respectful? How are they portraying it? If I would have an issue, it would have to be because they were not playing the character well, which at that point it's just an issue with the acting, or if they're like outside and in their positionality as a straight person in the real world, they're saying homophobic stuff and they're like degrading the gay community, then absolutely let's have a conversation about whether or not we as queer people should be elevating that.
Are they MAGA? Are they, yeah, like for sure. And like, and that also goes too with like when you see people kind of talking about, like, I don't know, people like violating boundaries and stuff in a queer space. And it's like, the issue isn't that this person is straight. They may or may not be. The issue is that, like, that behavior is unacceptable. And, like, you should not have to have anybody violate your boundaries in a queer space or otherwise, you know? But yeah, and so it's like, you know, for me, yeah, it does not matter to me. I mean, I am very biased about this, understandably, but it does not matter to me whether these actors in this queer show are queer. It does matter to me. Oh, there she is. Yeah. Yeah. How they use their platform, like the level of care put into the work, like who they voted. I mean, they're Canadian. I guess they didn't vote, you know.
One of them's American, I think.
Oh, yeah, one of them is American.
Connor's from Texas, yeah.
I feel very confident that Connor Story's not MAGA.
Yeah, me too.
So, yeah, I don't know. And I feel like we should always be harder on MAGA people than we are. We should be less hard on people who, for whatever reason, may or may not choose to publicly disclose their identity.
I'm in the process of doing some further reading on biphobia in particular and trying to educate myself there. So while I'm sure in the future I might come up with some smarter words to use to unpack the way that this discourse focuses itself around bi people and then forces them into the impossible position of trying to prove a sexuality that they have been discouraged from even imagining or taking seriously. For now, I'm just going to point you to my new friend Black and White Thinking, who gave me a very promising reading list, and who I clipped from earlier to help explain the impact of the Kit Connor situation from what felt like a more relevant point of view than my own. You can find that video and her channel linked in the description below. I feel like she might be a really valuable resource for anybody else looking to sort of sharpen their bi advocacy abilities in the wake of the unending war on bisexuals, so definitely go check her out. Like I said to Becky, the bisexual vibes in Love, Simon are off the charts if you're reading this book with an eye to see what is similar and not what you might get mad about with a snappy catchphrase like gay movie for straight people. I mean, Leah burns Simon a mix CD with Rilo Kiley on it, even before Becky knew the character was bisexual. It's really sad to me that such little space is left for queerness as a possibility, that so much of the discourse around this book came from such a combative angle. And like I said to Becky, having finally read the book just toward the beginning of this year, there's something really heartbreaking to me about how prophetic a lot of Simon ended up being. Still would have been emotionally impactful to me reading it and thinking generally about being closeted. But when Simon is yelling at Martin and he's saying, like, this is mine and I get to decide who to tell and how to tell them and when to tell them, there's such an additional level to this, reading it with the hindsight of everything that you would experience.
What's very funny is a couple people who did seek me out to apologize. I'm like, I swear to God, you did nothing wrong. I feel like maybe some of the people who apologized to me were like apologizing for something like, oh yeah, Becky's book is not own voices, you know, and I'm like, that's a zero offense. Like, you could not have known that information. Like, that is never something in a million years I would ever hold against anybody. And it is, like, lovely that somebody is, like, willing to approach me like that, but it was totally unnecessary. Most people probably don't realize how much, some of the people who did say stuff, I doubt they realize kind of how much it affected me. One that was really memorable to me was somebody who was, you know, kind of fighting the fight on probably Twitter with people who were like, you know, no, Becky's queer, stop calling Becky straight. And this person kept insisting and doubling and tripling down. But Becky was not queer when she wrote Simon. That's what I'm saying, is she... All I can think about, you know, like my immediate reaction to reading that was like remembering when I wrote that part that you mentioned where Simon is yelling.
And you know what? You don't get to say it's not a big thing. This is a big fucking thing, okay? This was supposed to be, this is mine. I'm supposed to decide when and where and who knows and how I want to say it. Suddenly my throat gets thick. So, yeah, you took that from me. And then you brought Blue into it. Seriously? You fucking suck, Martin. I mean, I don't even want to look at you. He's crying. He's trying not to, but he's seriously full on crying, and my heart sort of twists. So, can you just step away from my car, I say, and leave me the fuck alone? He nods, puts his head down, and walks away quickly. I get in my car and turn it on. And then I just start sobbing.
And like I broke down sobbing after I wrote that, and I cried my little eyes out, and I did not understand why I was crying, but I don't know, you can't tell me that like came out of nowhere. You just, I didn't understand that part of myself, but I think it existed. And no matter what, a stranger on the internet, it's very strange to like confidently declare that it didn't exist. Like that's invasive and weird and really hurtful, and I get it. Like if you hate Simon and you've been shitting on Simon for a couple of years and saying that it's the straightest thing you've ever read and you can tell I'm straight, I get it. I put you in a bind. Like, but like that's, there were people who were in that situation though who immediately, and they didn't like necessarily apologize to me, they didn't know me, did not have access to me, or didn't feel like they did, but they were like publicly reevaluating that. I'm like, I have so much respect for that. And if that's like, if somebody who was like that is like watching this, I hope, I have like no beef with you, and I think you're cool, and I think you're awesome, and I like just, I don't know that I would have had the ability to kind of self-examine that quickly and that compassionately in real time, and some people really don't.
Again, like I've said before, I'm a person who tends to need things said to me literally in words, but even I read Simon versus, and that book had this theme of like, don't pressure people out of the closet, people can come out on their own terms when they're ready. And then right after that she published Leah on the Offbeat, which was a book about like a bisexual girl discovering that she's bisexual. And then like all the discourse online was people being like, Becky wouldn't even know what it's like to be a bisexual girl who's not out of the closet. And also she would never know what it's like to be pushed out of the closet. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure she wouldn't know either of those things? Or like you're trying to manifest that she becomes the target of those things? Like, she'd never know what it's like to be outed against your will, so I'm gonna out her against her will. Like, is that what you're doing right now?
Like, it sucked, and it was scary, and I was anxious, and I was 37, and like, it is something I think about all the time, not just coming out, but just like, gay stuff. The books that I end up most wanting to write these days tend to be like, my last couple books have been sapphic books. I like love writing those, and it makes me feel like, I'm writing in my own community, but I know that not everybody necessarily sees it that way, so it is like a little unnerving sometimes.
I would forgive you for not knowing this, just based on the way that people like to talk about Becky, but after her debut with Love, Simon, a vast majority of her YA books have not, in fact, been gay boy romance. As she said, these days she's primarily interested in writing sapphic fiction, a trend that began with Leah on the Offbeat, a spin-off of Simon that was published a month after the movie's theatrical release, and that trend has continued through recent titles like Imogen Obviously and Amelia If Only. I was really interested to hear you say the decision to write about Leah and Abby wasn't already in your head when you were writing Simon, because I was reading it and I felt like I was seeing all of these little moments. I was picking up vibes when I was reading Simon.
Vibes are blatantly there. I have nothing to say for myself. Like, how do I even defend? Like, it's ridiculous, right? Like, it's like, no one wrote that but me. Like, I did not have like a secret lesbian ghostwriter, or like, I don't know. They, like, those two characters were just into each other on the page, and I wrote it and didn't see it. Like, I don't know. Who could say? At this point, too, I just have, like, accepted the fact that, like, there is a level of obliviousness, that I have been able to achieve that I think, I'm not the best at many things, but I do think I'm like in the top tier kind of, the A team of people who are like that oblivious about their own identity. It's like hard to do that more beautifully than I did.
And though Becky has had to set boundaries about her own use of Goodreads, I did take a peek myself at some of the 1-star reviews to see what, besides the gay stories for straight people refrain, was being repeated when people took issue with Simon. Which led me to a line that made me laugh out loud when I read it with the full context we can apply now. A line where, in his internal monologue, teenaged Simon makes a throwaway observation that as more of the queer people he knew were girls, maybe it was easier to come out as a girl than as a boy. Maybe it would be different if we lived in New York, but I don't know how to be gay in Georgia. We're right outside Atlanta, so I know it could be worse, but Shady Creek isn't exactly a progressive paradise. At school, there are one or two guys who are out, and people definitely give them crap. Not like violent crap, but the word F slur. I'm fine with it in the context of fictional, but I don't want to get demonetized on this video for saying a slur in context. I'm sorry. Not like violent crap, but the F slur isn't exactly uncommon. And I guess there are a few lesbian and bisexual girls, but I think it's different for girls. Maybe it's easier. If there's one thing the Tumblr has taught me, it's that a lot of guys consider it hot when a girl is a lesbian. Though, I guess it happens in reverse. There are girls like Leah who do these yaoi pencil sketches and post them to websites, which I guess is cool with me. Leah's drawings are actually kind of awesome. And you can catch my full interview with Becky on the Patreon. In it, I told her that while I, unlike many of the less charitable Goodreads reviewers, did not take that line to be reflective of what her true feelings really were at the time of writing it, I did find it pretty funny in the context of what a hard time Becky had coming to terms with her own queerness despite being a woman.
That's a really interesting example. For me, when I go back and think about that particular line, more so than probably anything that I've written in all of my books, that's the one where I kind of feel like, like a lot of the time I can kind of be like, I definitely see where people are coming from with this, and sometimes I think like, we're coming into this with a range of experiences, even kind of as a community or whatever. That one, I'm like, I wish I'd done that differently. It is true that I did not, in fact, insert my own feelings into that line of Simon's inner monologue. Like, Simon is a dumbass, kind of through and through with his husband. But I definitely didn't, the narrative did not push back on it. I did not circle back to that idea kind of within that book. You could argue that I did by writing, and I actually, that was very much on my mind, even in choosing to write Leah on the offbeat and kind of how I chose to end up. I wrote this character who did know she was bi and had a very hard time coming out even to her gay best friend. Some of it was atonement, kind of. But, even if I am kind of introducing a counter narrative in Leah on the offbeat, I know that's not the same thing as including it in Simon. And while I definitely, it makes me twitchy to kind of think that if I am going to include that line of inner monologue, I have to immediately disavow it. I wish I had pushed back on that concept somewhere in the book, even if it's something that he learned many chapters later, and I didn't do that. I want to say, actually, when I years later had the opportunity, actually, honestly, the biggest regret, more so than that, is just the absolutely gross pile of Harry Potter references in all of my early books up through, I want to say, Love Creekwood might be the last one that has them in it. But with Simon, because Simon was still being reprinted and still selling, I had the opportunity to it's unusual, so never ever use this to be mad at an author who doesn't do this, because chances are they did not have the opportunity. I was able to do an edit where I removed the Harry Potter references, and what that looked like was I actually had to go through and replace them with things that were roughly the same amount of letters and things, so the formatting didn't interfere with the formatting. Yeah, because I couldn't bump the pages around, but I could just sort of play with it enough. And that was very doable with the Harry Potter references. I want to say, I know I tried, and I think I pulled it off in some way. I think I changed the line, that one line. In the later editions, the change was not made specifically for the special edition. If you do have the one with the rainbow edges, the newer version, that one does have the Harry Potter free text for sure. All of those were printed with it. Some, but not all, of the regular paperbacks were, because the change, I actually don't know when they started printing it, because they didn't tell me and they didn't tell my editor. We were trying to find out, and we assumed that they didn't do it, and then we just found out they were on shelves. It was so weird, but I was so happy. It was a little delight. But yeah, anyway, I want to say the trick is page 9, I think. Check and see if Simon says his glasses make him look like a hot scientist. And if it says it makes him look like a hot scientist, then you're safe, and it is a newer printing. It would take too long to find it, but I'm now I'm very curious. I'm was I able to do that? Because that was a more complex change. terms of the formatting. But it was like the one kind of non-Harry Potter, like Harry Potter is a no-brainer, like J.K. Rowling is a monster in a turf, and like what a gift it was to be able to like expunge her, especially knowing that like the Rainbow special editions, we're not going to have her, like that is, I'm beyond grateful for that.
Let me know in the comments below if you've got one of the updated versions and what the replacement line ended up being for that so hated "maybe it's easier to be a lesbian because apparently straight guys think that's hot" piece of Simon inner monologue. My personal copy was actually rescued from a box of books somebody was giving away on the street just a couple of weeks after Becky commented on my channel for the first time.
Oh wait, can I write fan fiction about the person? In my head, the person who left it out there did it because they got the Rainbow edition and they were so happy they didn't want the Harry Potter one anymore. And I'm glad it found a home with somebody who is able to like read it with the full kind of critical context and not take from it any kind of signal that they should watch the new Harry Potter show.
I heard from Becky for the first time when she commented on a video I made last summer, thanking me specifically for making the point that while we might think our mockery of a public figure like Jojo Siwa is ultimately harmless, that the narratives we reinforce about people who are public figures also impact not just how we treat the real people in our real lives, but also how those real people in our real lives can expect to be treated by us. She was so kind, and I was so excited to hear from her, and I found it so encouraging, but our interaction was limited to that one comment section up until the beginning of this year. I was not brave enough to actually reach out about doing a video together until she commented on another video of mine, and I can't tell you how glad I am that I did.
Also, I should mention too, the reason we connected is because I am like a longtime fan, a Nuance Corner veteran.
Thank you so much. That is so cool.
On YouTube, like, you know, with, I don't know why my name on YouTube is like Becky Albertelli 1955 or something, like I'm a boomer. Like, I don't know, but then I type like a boomer on YouTube, I think, like the text crosses out sometimes for no reason. Yeah, poor H bomber guy having to like edit that out. Like,
I know I told you I'm limiting the amount of times I cut in to tell you how much I love Becky, so know that this is me being measured.
She is the mother I never had. She is the sister everybody would want. She is the friend that everybody deserves. I don't know a better person.
And I also don't know a better person to tell you what the discourse was like, since she's the one who lived through it.
The book was written in 2013, came out in 2015. It wasn't a huge book at all. It's actually never hit the New York Times list or anything. Definitely most of its audience came after the film or in the lead up to the film, so 2018-ish. The movie was March of 2018. One of the points, I think, that kept coming up then and actually still comes up now in a way that I find very frustrating, just the framing of it. The thing I kept hearing was that it's not that this book in particular is the problem. It's the fact that every popular book about gay teen boys is written by a straight woman. And first of all, it's never been true. But not, you know, people did have more nuance in the discourse. Not everybody was saying every single one.
Becky is wonderful and thoughtful and did not want to generalize, but I couldn't help myself but to agree, just as a spectator to this discourse, that there's a lot of using Love, Simon and Heartstopper and Red, White, and Royal Blue as like this shorthand, that they think that there's like this big widespread genre problem. But also they only ever have those three examples, and those three examples aren't even accurate to what they think they're complaining about in terms of author identity.
I think there are a couple things going on with that. One is that, you know, you do have, as far as I can tell, a difference in the demographics between adult romance and YA in terms of like queer books. And I don't know enough about the demographics of romance to speak on that with any authority, but I do know a lot about the demographics in queer YA. Anybody who now in 2026 is seeing that the vast majority of mainstream YA books about gay men or about queer boys or anything like that is written by straight women, I literally don't even know where they're getting that idea. And if you interrogate that, it almost always does reveal that they are talking and thinking about Simon, Heartstopper, and Red, White, and Royal Blue, none of which are written by straight women. I believe I am the only one of the three of us who is a woman. I'm actually not sure how Alice Oseman would describe themselves, but I believe Alice uses she, them. Casey McQuiston is non-binary, uses they, them. All three of us were pressured to out ourselves kind of in the course of this discourse. I know me and Casey are now openly bi. Alice is openly aro-ace.
Let's look at the authors that this regularly happens to. Alice Oseman is an asexual woman writing about an ensemble cast. Charlie is the only gay male character in the main cast, so there's one gay male character. People were also forgetting that, like, the reason Heartstopper took off was that it was a spin-off of Solitaire, which was Alice Oseman writing about Charlie's older sister Tori, who was the original main character, who's also an asexual woman, like Alice Oseman is. So I'm like, she originally was writing about her own perspective and then did a spin-off with an ensemble cast that included that and other things. This seems to be like a thing where people see people who are women or people who are assigned female at birth. It's just like anyone who's not a cisgender man. People will see doing this and be like, okay, well, I'm going to assume sinister intentions on their part. And it happens to women a lot.
And it's like every single time, it's like the biggest surprise in the world to people, whatever specific author who is like writing queer stuff and has been for a long time might be interested in queerness. Obviously, that does not necessarily mean that author is queer. And obviously, that does not mean you need to center that author on your own voices, pride, reckless or anything, but like it baffles me how like stunned people are every single time an author in that position, usually under duress, comes out later, cycle through this specific conversation again and again. I literally saw on Threads today, day of recording, a whole other conversation of people discussing like, do you get weirded out when you see somebody who like only writes queer stuff, but they're a cishet author? And I'm like, no, I don't, because I was that. And people did get weirded out by me. And that made me feel so guilty and so ashamed. And it did make me feel like I was maybe secretly a fetishist in ways that I didn't understand. Like it really like shut down a lot of that questioning process for me. It's stuff that's like easier to understand in retrospect what was happening in my head. At the time I didn't understand it in the same way, but I don't understand why we keep retreading the same conversation in the same way with the same points when we see where it leads and then we act surprised when it leads there. I know we've covered this already, but I just like cannot emphasize enough that my story is not unusual. It just was more viral than the average like publishing industry story, but it has happened to many authors, and it continues to happen.
An enormous benefit to Becky being a Nuance Corner regular is that it means I got to reference some of my other videos during our conversation. Like the video I had just uploaded at the time I first spoke to Becky, where Kat Tenbarge and I talked about the many manufactured scandals that surround Chapel Roan. We were talking about something similar just earlier about Chapel Roan and about thinking about people either explicitly being told or at least having it in the back of their head, like, that is the example, you don't want to be like that. Somebody said in the comments of that video that they've thought about that before, even before watching that video, as like a queer musician and fearing the success that they want and that they're like reaching for because they know that it would come with an inevitable backlash. They know that people would get weird about them. I believe specifically this was a bisexual person, and like, while I will always say lesbophobia has a lot to do with the way Chapel Roan is treated, there are like completely different ways in which the biphobia of it all would impact that, because there's so much like searching and investigating, and that is something that lesbians and bisexuals have in common, I feel like, is people have this idea that like they can get down to this root of your sexuality that's going to be more accurate than what you're describing. There's some kind of truth that they can get to and an objective reality. And it just drives me bonkers because I think labels are descriptive and not prescriptive. So the only purpose of the language that somebody is using is to communicate with you. Like, they are using whatever language might not perfectly fit what's going on in their head, but that gives you the idea of what they want you to know about them.
Well, it's also just like, to go back to what you said about like the commenter, right? I do wish, and what I always come back to is just like, even if you don't like see the relevance of, you know, having these conversations in relation to kind of who you perceive to be kind of an untouchable celebrity, even though you and Kat Tenbarge made a very compelling case for why that is still important to discuss.
Thank you.
I wholeheartedly agree. But even if you are kind of like, you know, you don't have the bandwidth to care about that, understandably 2026, I get it. But like, I do urge you watching this to pause and consider the people like the commenter who represents, to me, like that's the kind of comment that I've gotten and seen many, many times. And that's the kind of conversation I've had many, many times. Like, you know, the person at the center of the discourse is just one of the affected people. And that, like, I always come back to that. It's like really, really important, I think, to think about kind of who exists kind of in those ripples when this kind of conversation comes up and does have the ripple effect that it has.
You may have noticed that's basically the original conversation we had a year ago about Jojo Siwa. And I think Becky's is such an interesting perspective on all of this. This is the first time in the history of my channel that I'm speaking directly about the misogyny slop ecosystem to somebody who was, for a time, at the center of it. I find Becky's empathy and her outward focus to everybody else who gets impacted in the outer reaches of these ripple effects really inspiring. And I think, had I been treated the way that she was treated for the apparent crime of writing a sweet gay YA book and experiencing moderate success for it while I was still personally unpacking some stuff, I would be a much, much meaner person. I'm just genuinely really impressed by how Becky is so compassionate and how much I can tell that informs the way that she wants to navigate this discourse. So this is a video I really wanted to make sure I got right, which means, like many of my videos that I get into perfectionist hyperfocus paralysis on, I had to break it into multiple parts. To my absolute joy and relief, Becky has indicated that she's open to coming back for more conversations and more videos. I want to do a more complete, critical, positive reevaluation of Love, Simon than I felt like I had time to get to in this month for my big Pride Month Opus cap off thing. But I knew that I wanted to make a video about that way before I ever even knew that Becky was in my audience. Over the weekend, I sent her a preview of this video with slightly less of the sappy stuff in the cut. I'm really hoping the Oprah joke was funny if she rewatches. And after me spending like the last 6 months putting, frankly, pretty unreasonable amounts of pressure on myself to get this video right, and to express all of the many, many ideas that it's had churning around in me over the last 6 months in just the right way, Becky told me that the video made her feel understood, and I did cry a little bit. It just feels like so much of the way Becky and her work has been discussed, you know, in ways that barely have anything to do with either her as a person or her body of work, just sort of being distilled down into this discourse shorthand. It's been a series of deliberate misinterpretations that I find really unfair. I'll be really glad if this actual exposure to her does anything to help people clear up those misconceptions about her, but either way, I'm just so enormously, incredibly grateful to have been able to have this conversation with her. Sincerely, this is so cool. And to your point about just seeing a Threads post about this today, I don't even know who the fuck they would be referencing in 2026. And even if they were, I think you mentioned this last time about like queer YA isn't really having the best moment right now. Like who is reaching unprecedented levels of unearned success right now in queer media, and it's a straight person. I don't see a widespread issue right now to the point where we need to be like vaguing about it and circling the troops of insiders making fake outsider art about queer people. Like, I don't think that that's happening. I don't think that that's something we need to be worried about. And I think that when you don't spend your time worried about that, you don't look stupid a few months or years later when somebody is forced by the people just like you who have been harassing them to come out under duress.
No, but you don't have to look stupid because you can just double down and there are all kinds of like goalpost moving phrases that you can jump to. I know them all very well. Like the simplest one is just, yeah, well, she's still not a gay man.
But it lacks a sense of authenticity, which I guess it's not that surprising considering it was written by a bisexual woman.
Another thing I'm being measured about here is how many bad Simon takes I could cinema sins my way through. The fact that this video was obviously made after Becky came out, but it was still so fucking unfair about her positionality with the book, based entirely, I will remind you, on her earlier attempts to be generous and not to speak outside of her given lane, under the conversational right-of-way school of thinking that we all fall into. This guy makes me legitimately furious. This is another part of the video that was not in Becky's preview because it's weird to make your friend watch somebody say something so mean and shitty about them, but I want the rest of you to see it. I want you to understand what I'm talking about when I reference the ways that Becky has been shorthanded in the discourse. Notice the way he frames her bisexuality relative to her perceived right to have told this story. He says that it's not surprising that Simon, in his estimation, lacks authenticity, given that it was written by a bisexual woman. He just said that. He didn't, so he's comfortable doing biphobia, misogyny, or, oh wait, as in many such cases, both. And yes, I am certain of that assessment, because listen to how he continues.
She is living a heteronormative lifestyle.
Hey, can we be fucking serious for a second? Is it heteronormative to write several traditionally published beloved queer YA books? That is a heteronormative lifestyle to do that? You really think that? If you mean, she has a husband and I'm mad about it, say, she has a husband and I'm mad about it. 'Cause this guy clearly means she has a husband and he's mad about it. He tries to distance himself from that just a little bit, from that obvious interpretation, because he acts like he's something else other than the people who were up in arms about Simon.
People were up in arms because she was perceived as a heterosexual woman who had written this story about a gay boy.
But surprise, surprise, this man's arms are up.
But then she came out as bisexual, and I don't want to be the one to say it, but, just because you're in the community doesn't mean you can speak for all experiences. It doesn't mean that you'll be able to relate to all experiences.
Like, it kind of seems like he did want to be the one to say it, right? And also, worth saying, dude, catty monosexual gay men don't get to speak for the whole community either. Even and especially if you're just recycling a talking point that you are assuming will be unobjected to because so many people let biphobia and misogyny slide. Imagine how much worse all of this discourse was before Becky was forced to come out and people had to at least give this obligatory, well, she's bisexual, but it's not queer enough for me, sort of disclaimer.
What's so interesting that I don't know that I've really talked about very much, this is just a moment that happens in my head every time I look at this discourse, is when I see people talk about straight women, it hits me. And I have been out since 2020, right? Like, it's, the years have stacked up, right? Like, I've been out for a while, but it's like I also know that when people are talking about straight women, they are talking about me, like, for sure. And that's why it feels so personal sometimes. And then you'll even have people be like, no, obviously I don't mean people who are openly queer, but the thing is like, well, first of all, a lot of y'all are mentioning me by name, like, as a so like, let's put that in there too. But like, you are talking about a lot of people who have not come out yet, who you are perceiving as straight women, and you are often naming them, and these people may or may not be straight women. I
made a video for my channel just talking about this controversy and being like, this is why we don't do this, okay? Especially because people were not learning their lesson. I was seeing so many people on Twitter and wherever else still being like, well, she's still a woman writing about gay men. And it's like, okay, how much are we just going to keep doing this? Because like writers can write about people who are not exactly like them, and like queer people don't owe you specifics. And then like, they did that then to Casey McQuiston, who then came out as trans. So I'm like, are we gonna, like, how much more do we have to keep doing this before you realize that, like, judge the book on the quality of the book? And like, again, if you want to read books that it's like, I want to prioritize reading books by queer authors who are out and I know for a fact that they're queer, like, you can ask for recommendations for that. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to read that, but like, that doesn't mean you bully authors who aren't out, right?
The other piece of this, and I like want to be a little bit like careful how I talk about this, is I am speculating based on how I think I would feel. if this were me, but like, my experience of sexuality is like, it has been a nightmare, kind of having people question that and kind of litigate that and relitigate it and debate that and kind of my motivations. But like, I want to like emphasize again that a lot of the people this has happened to, kind of particularly in the book community, most people are not cis. I am cis, and most people who this has happened to are not cis. And the kind of the conversations about just kind of weighing in on people's gender, it feels really cruel to me. And like, it seems to kind of cut at something really visceral and just that it's like your whole self almost in a way. And I think sexuality might be that for some people, but for me, it like, I don't think it was a nightmare. Like the discourse and especially the scale of it sucked, but like it wasn't, it didn't feel to me like I imagine it would feel like to be misgendered on that kind of scale, to be continuously misgendered even after you are dragged out kicking and screaming, to be misgendered more often than not in professional conversations about your work. That is something that I see happening. I mean, I hate to I don't even want to bring up specific names because this is like specific people's trauma, but I will say that like there are specific authors, you watching this may know kind of some of who I'm thinking about, who are called straight women more often than not, and they are not women. They are not women. They're openly not women, often have been dragged out of the closet. This is more than one person, by the way. I straight up, my secret, it's not much of a secret. I have a burner account on Reddit, and my burner account has 2 jobs. Also, if you found my burner account, you'd be like, yeah, this is Becky. Like, clearly, it could not be like, there's nothing happening on that account that you would not expect to see from me on main. But it's like, one job is like, sometimes if somebody is like asking for a particular book that like hits certain beats, I'll be like, okay, you need to read this one by Julian Winters or whatever. I never recommend my own books because that feels weird, but I'm in there recommending queer YA by people if it is like a specific rec, because it feels really good to be able to like nail that rec. But my other job on that burner is to be like, so-and-so is openly non-binary. Like, this is not a good example to use here. It's just like, I don't know, it really upsets me. It's like, it's hard to talk about because I don't want to reveal some of the conversations that I've had, but it has hurt a lot of people to be misgendered at scale, and I'm not naming anybody in particular. And when I say that I've had conversations with people, is likely not somebody you expect to like know that. I'm not, but it's a really small thing to do to like check on that. Like, usually that information is out there if you Google it, and it does not prevent you from critiquing the book or anything like that. Like, you don't have to read that book too if you're not sure about it. And that's the other thing too, is like, when I say base it on the book, the contents of the book, it feels like it's like, okay, so now I have to like take that risk with the book. No, you don't. Like, first of all, you don't have to read the book if you're not sure it's going to be a good experience for you. And you also, I would definitely recommend kind of getting that information for people who have read it, read reviews, even read the 1-star reviews. Like, don't tag the author in the 1-star reviews. But like, the reviews that's part of why I'm like grateful for even the 1-star reviews, because I understand that is a source of information for people who are approaching my books and trying to figure out if my books are safe for them to read, which they may or may not be for any number of reasons for any particular reader. And I definitely encourage people to do that. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I have like no issue with anybody who's like searching like Becky Albertalli's sexuality. Look that up. Anything that I've said online, I mean, I would check the date on that with me, and don't trust the AI preview. Definitely feel free. Like, I don't find it invasive at all if you are searching that stuff out for me, and talk about it in your group chats or whatever. Is like, wait, is Becky Albertalli straight? Like, you have that conversation. I think when it gets public and when it builds upon itself, and somebody who's like, Love Simon is written by a straight woman, somebody else just sees that, and that for them is evidence. They're like, they saw it online, that Love Simon is written by a straight woman, that everybody in Love Simon is straight, everybody involved in the production of that movie is straight, just trying to make, and it's like not true.
This is also part of why I deleted Threads. I was seeing all this discourse that was like, this year for Pride Month, can we please read books about gay men that are written by gay men and not just straight women? And I was like, is this even a real problem? Because like I keep seeing people say that this is such a prevalent problem, but I cannot think of what, like, can you name for me a single straight woman author that's profiting off of them? And then they name some names and I'm like, okay, did they like say in an interview that they were straight? Like, are you just assuming? And like, no one would ever respond to that because they don't have a response to that because they are just assuming, right? I kept getting in these arguments about it. So eventually I just posted this long rant that I was like, all right, you guys, here's what we need to understand. Queer books are all under attack right now, and reading queer books in general is a good thing. The whole idea that like, oh my god, straight women are just dominating the queer male books world is misogynistic in nature. Because this type of discourse does not happen to men. And then I used Becky and Hank Green as like two opposite sides of the coin. Becky wrote a book about a young queer man, and she was not out yet. And everybody harassed her for it. Hank Green wrote a book about a queer woman when he was still publicly identifying as a straight man. Nobody harassed him about it. And he eventually did come out as bisexual, but it was years later, and he didn't do it under pressure. He did it like when he felt comfortable with it, just like deep in a meme thread on Twitter. That's awesome. But I was like, there's a clear difference in how these two things were handled, where like both of these people were authors who were publicly presumed to be straight because they hadn't come out as anything else yet. They were both writing about a queer character who was not their gender. And when it was a woman author doing this, everybody harassed her and claimed, oh, she's probably just trying to profit off of this. She's probably just trying to like steal queer people's trauma for her own profit, etc. When a man did this, nobody did that to him.
You try to talk to somebody about it, and I've really tried, and I've tried to in such good faith, because I do consider it to be like, it's a shame, even if you take away all of the aspects of the identity interrogation and the bi erasure and the queer erasure of all of it, if nothing else, it erases a lot of success and also like really wonderful and exciting books by queer men, you know? Maybe now is a moment to, if you like my books, you were looking for own voices stuff with that kind of voicey rom-com vibe, like you should be reading Julian Winters, you should be reading Brian Kennedy, Matthew Hubbard, like there's so many options. All of that gets erased. These authors, sometimes like very, very successful authors writing in that space, get erased, you know, as if no one's ever heard of some very famous books, at least if you were following like
Aristotle and Dante comes to my mind immediately.
They both died at the end. #1 on the New York Times paperback list for like at least a year. Like these are big books, and that's really exciting, and these authors deserve their flowers, you know? So that's one thing.
It also makes me think of that statistic about how women in a group can still speak on average less than men do, but they think that it's women talking more. I think that's happening here.
I have said that in group chats. Yes, and it's happening here. It is how, like, I can't think of any other explanation. It's like baffling to me. I do think there is some conflation with the different age categories too. Like people definitely are kind of mixing that up and not necessarily understanding publishing age category distinctions. Valid, I get that for sure. Don't weaponize that though. Well, also, the other thing about, you know, Simon Heartstopper, Red, White, and Royal Blue, the most recently published of those three is Red, White, and Royal Blue, which I believe came out in 2017 or 2018 or something. And like they seem more recent because the adaptations were more recent, and also Alice's books, like the Heartstopper books originally were not published in the US. So those US publications came later. Those started out as, I believe, a free webcomic, and then they were published in the UK and maybe other places. I'm not sure exactly where. So I understand that they seem more recent. I understand that Simon has had a 10-year anniversary edition, so it got like another little promo boost or something more recently. You know, that was last year in 2025. You know, so I'm not saying that these books, you know, I don't mean to be disingenuous and be like, why do you even bring them up? Like, I get it. But it's also not, in my mind, like representative of the current YA landscape. And I do keep coming back to this idea that you are like missing out on a lot of really exciting work by authors who I think based on kind of, what I am hearing that people are looking for, I'm like, I think you have treasure to discover, Like, I think you're going to be really happy once you like really dive in, because there is some amazing stuff out there.
I do think it's interesting because I pointed this out in my video that I did with the like debunking the Out Magazine article, that like people keep insisting that these are straight women writing books about gay men, when not only are they not straight women, but they're also overwhelmingly writing books about queer women. And it's just the people keep focusing on the ones about men. And that really weirds me out, because like for all the arguments of people being like, well, if they're straight women, then they're male centered or whatever. And it's like, first of all, they're not straight women. And second of all, if you're only focusing on the books that they wrote about men, then you're being male centered. Because like, yes, Becky wrote Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, and it was great. But my favorite book of hers is Imogen, obviously, which is a book about queer women. And even at the time that she was pressured out of the closet, she like still wasn't exclusively writing books about queer men. She had Leah on the Offbeat and like a bunch of other things. So it's like she was writing sapphic books already, and like nobody was caring, because like books about men for some reason sell better. I don't know why that is. I'm guessing it's some internalized misogyny to an extent, and maybe something to do with how things are marketed or how I'm sure I don't think there's one answer. I think there's multiple factors into why that is. But I do think it's weird that when people bring up these examples, they don't even really look at the sapphic books these authors are also writing. They're only looking at the ones about men. Well, for me, when I look at it, people started off by being like, okay, straight women shouldn't be writing about queer men. And I'm like, well, how do you know people are straight? And they're like, okay, well, even if they're queer women, it's still, they don't know the experience of queer men. And now I'm like, now this is turning into women are not as good at XYZ as men are. This is now turning into, here is a thing that women should be quieter about. Women should take a step back. Because I don't see people saying men need to write less books about lesbians. I know men who write books about lesbians. They don't get harassed for it. And like, yeah. So I know men who write books about lesbians, about bisexual women. Some of these men are straight, some are bi, some are gay. And like, but if you're like, as cis men, they don't get harassed for it. So I think there's maybe like a part of it that is just some level of like subconscious internalized misogyny, where people are like, well, this is a man's domain. Writing about men is for men. And that's the thing. People don't, like, I know there's, like, r/men writing women and, like, jokes about, like, when men write women badly, but, like, men do not receive the level of harassment that women do for their writing. Like, they just don't. So I think there is, like, to ignore the misogynistic element is just short-sighted. It's just dishonest to do that, in my opinion.
It's also so deeply bioessentialist, this idea of, like, there are these experiences that are, like, specifically male and specifically female, and that there's, like, no hope of crossover or even just like overlap and empathy when it's like if you're writing about a human experience. And especially we talked about this a little bit in our discussion about heteronormativity and gender roles in relationships, but like even a relationship between a man and a woman, when a member or both members of that relationship are queer, doesn't have to be that same like heteronormative thing. Like I think to consider it in such a rigid way of like only men can write about men and only gay men can write about gay men, like it erases so much of like just like the solidarity of the human experience. Like I feel like that it's just people are just people.
Right.
It's the constant moving of the goalposts, because if somebody really does truly only write about their own experience, either they're going to get criticized for being a Mary Sue, or like, as you pointed out, people don't know as much about the other sapphic books that are written by these same authors that they're mad about for writing MM. Like, and that's obviously not the fault of the author. Like, if you're thinking about this rationally at all, like, do you really think that these like lecherous fujoshi women authors, like, they wanted their MM books to go really big, and then they only did that once, and then they started writing a bunch of FF books that they decided not to have be as popular as the MM books? Like, what?
Like, are you telling me that these authors didn't want their FF books to sell more? That they were like, no, I'm cool with having less success for this book about women? Like, no. There's no way the authors want that.
You know, part of the problem too is just publishing. It's just like everything is like lightning in a bottle. Like, you don't know what causes a book to blow up. You just don't. If publishers knew that, and if authors knew that, then like more books would blow up like that, right? And the same thing goes with film adaptations. I see people who are sometimes so angry at me because Simon got adapted and then they went ahead and made a spin-off about a different gay teen boy who is not somebody, Victor is not a character from one of my books. The high school is the same high school. And they're like, why didn't you adapt Leon Offbeat? Like, why would you not adapt Imogen, obviously? And I'm like, honestly, I have not gotten a lick of interest in film for any of my Sapphic books. Not a lick of interest. And all of, Simon got made, Victor got made. What If It's Us had a lot of near misses, and a couple of my MF books have also been optioned behind the scenes. One of them did just get made. Yeah, I'm just like, y'all, like, you think I don't want, Imogen, obviously, particularly is my baby. Everybody who sees me talk about it, like that's my,
that's so cute. Yeah.
Of course I'm rooting for Imogen. If I could fund it, if I could fund a movie, I would. I can't, the authors don't control, I think, as much as people think, which it's not anybody's fault for not knowing that. The industry is very opaque. Hollywood is also very, very opaque.
Nobody wants to only be known for their first book that comes out. Like, being an author is like a lifelong career. It's not like you're not supposed to hit your peak in your youth, because writing is a skill that you're supposed to improve on for the rest of your life. So, like, you want each book to be better than the last. You want your audience to like this next one and for it to be as popular as the last one was. And I feel that way too. Like, every book that I put out, I'm like, I think I've improved since the last one. And that's how it's supposed to be. There are some books I put out in the past that I'm like, I really could have done this part better. I'm not a fan of how I did this. But, like, when I put out a new book, I'm like, I think this one's better. And then the next one after it, hopefully I will improve even more. That's the goal. So it kind of sucks when people latch on to only one book you wrote at the beginning of your career a decade plus ago, and you've written things since then that you're more proud of, that you think are even better than that one, but it's not getting the same publicity, or people aren't. And again, that's not the customer's fault. Like, if customers don't like it as much, that's fine, but I feel like a lot of customers just aren't even aware of them. They don't even know that these other books even exist. Like, when people criticize Becky for just writing fiction, I'm like, she wrote Simon, sure, but she's written so many FF books since then, and, like, I don't think anybody even knows about them. Because are they not getting as much publicity? Like, I don't know.
I think I do agree with you that there's a level of, like, just misogyny to all of it. I do think, like, also structurally we're all kind of programmed to where stories about men are the default when we're looking for something to read. And so, like, I think there are probably a lot of people who are more willing to give, like, queer a shot than queer FF. Like, if they're interested in queer media, but then something about two women just, like, feels a bridge too far for them or something because they didn't spend their whole life hungry for it like we did.
I wonder why that is, though. Like, is it because they're of this, like, male-centric worldview where people are like, well, men are the main characters. I guess men are the main characters in a lot of, like, classic literature we're given to read growing up, so maybe that just feels more, like, familiar?
Yeah.
That, like, if you're gonna go branch out and read something queer, that, like, you'll branch out and read something queer that's similar to what you're used to and that it has a male main character, but I don't know.
Or even maybe, like, if you're less engaging with your own queerness and you're approaching it as a woman, like, maybe the FF stuff is, like, too close. Like, maybe it's like, I'm not ready to be in the first person perspective of falling in love with a woman, but I could think about gay things if it's kind of, like, filtered for me through this other lens. Like, it kind of makes sense to me.
I pair Simon in my head a lot with Imogen, obviously, which is not my most recent book, but it's, like, the second most recent. There's actually a scene where I got to, like, directly kind of unpack the default kind of stuff in Imogen. And, like, to me, that was one of the coolest things, like, one of the just most incredible writing experiences that I had. I'm so grateful that I'm still able to write. I'm still able to publish. I can still, like, engage with my older ideas and revisit them and kind of, and I would imagine in 10 years, I'm going to have shit to say about Imogen. Like, I don't know. I am trying to kind of move toward viewing my work as in conversation with itself over time, in conversation with, just other work and just the culture more broadly, rather than, like, there's a tendency, I think, hyper focus on all of the ways that I feel like I've kind of fallen short. And that's very real too. I definitely have things about all of my books that I would change or rework if I could. And I think that's probably normal. It probably is, in a way, a sign of personal growth. It is a gift and it is a privilege to be included in this conversation. I felt that acutely when I thought I was straight, and I feel that acutely now.
I did want to ask you kind of like, how does that feel, the difference in like writing something, knowing that you are part of the community that you're writing for? Does that change at all how you sit with that, or does writing kind of like still feel the same as it did before you came out? I guess also a question there is like, was there a period where you were writing queer fiction and you knew that you were bi but you weren't out yet? Like what's that look like?
I guess there are a couple of ways where the difference is really pronounced. The biggest one is book events. I used to get an absolutely like almost unbearable level of anxiety before every single book event, which I didn't flag as necessarily because I am a very anxious person, and I have generalized anxiety disorder. I have been taking Zoloft for like well over a decade. And it's not like I had any other public career like that to compare it to. So I was like, I guess I'm just the kind of person who like is going to fall apart every single time I stand in the front of a bookstore and talk about my work. I was kind of shocked by how much of that anxiety was like this weird, like tiptoeing around this like big elephant in the room kind of question,
Yeah.
Where, because the thing that was most anxiety provoking was, like, and it's such a normal question to get in an interview, but like, why did you write this? What made you decide to write about a gay character? I still get asked that sometimes because not everybody I speak to about my books is like, the point of entry is not necessarily the book community. Like I meet people in day-to-day life and they're like, what made you decide to write about a queer character? And the answer to that question is much clearer. I don't feel sheer panic when somebody asks me that anymore, and I am like delighted to talk about it. That's the biggest difference. And another big difference too is, and this is something that I'm not 100% sure, I may need to kind of continue thinking about this question. I may land somewhere else in a few years, but like, I do feel like I was somebody who, without realizing it, gravitated toward writing about gay men because it was a step removed, right? Like that's an oversimplification, but like if I were to like rank my number one reason, it would be because that was a space to explore queerness, coming out, anxiety around coming out, kind of some of those things that I was like, my little brain was like twirling around and whirling with in a way that just felt a couple inches away. And it was like, it's almost shocking how much I'm so much more into, like the reason I'm writing these sapphic books is like, that is very much like what I would like to write. Like that is the most interesting thing to write for me right now, and it was like, I don't think I'm ever going to write another book about gay men, partially because I barely survived the discourse, but also because I'm like, I don't know, when I sit down and try to think of like, well, what story would come to me, a lot of times the stories that kind of present themselves to me that I get most excited about seem to like be about a girl in some way, right? So that's a big difference for me. The writing process has always, for me, been very character specific. So it's always felt a little bit more like I am trying to find this particular character's voice, and I'm not necessarily approaching it differently based on character's gender. And I have always, like, I've used sensitivity readers, but I will use sensitivity readers even if I'm writing kind of in my own lane too. So I guess that part's not that different. And to answer your question about, like, was there a period of time where I was writing queer stuff, but I was not yet out? Initially, I was going to say no, because I very intentionally wrote MF for a long time to like give myself that space. I had in 2020 and in 2021 two MF books. But then I remembered in 2020 I also had my little Simon verse novella, Love Creek Wood, which is half Simon and Blue and half Leah and Abby. And when I wrote that, I was definitely, if not all the way there toward figuring it out, I was like most of the way there. I don't know. I think what made me feel like I could, what made me give myself permission to write that, for one thing, was that I didn't keep the money from it. Like all of my entire advance, everything, like my portion of it, like I can't make HarperCollins donate the money, but my entire portion went to Trevor Project. It was from the moment of conception of that book. It was always going to be a book for Trevor Project, period. But, I think kind of doing it that way maybe did give me the space to feel like I could like write a queer book while I was kind of, beginning to solidify kind of the answers to some of those questions in my own head. I think I see Simon, and this is going to be true with any queer movie in particular, or, even if not a movie, like queer big media, there are kind of these different layers of conversation that are happening at once, and we kind of conflate them, so kind of what we're talking about with that, of just these kind of different types of queer experiences that like may or may not be relatable, and is there still value in that if this particular experience being portrayed is not relatable to you, and to me, I find a lot of value in stories that, look like mine to like varying degrees, or don't look like mine at all. I do understand that, this conversation doesn't exist in a vacuum. And when people are talking about Simon in that way, and they're saying this isn't like it almost sounds absurd if it's just like, this is a bad movie or a bad story, because my experience didn't look like that. But I don't think that's kind of what people are really saying at the heart of it. What they're saying is that this story that doesn't look like my story is the only gay movie that's playing at a cinema within 100 miles of where I live. And it is the only one that ever has. Or whatever it is. It's like, because, it is such a fight every time for a piece of queer media to break through in a huge way. There is a lot of weight put on every single piece of media that does break through. And so the kinds of stories that like are kind of included in that small group versus excluded from that group, that I think feels more pronounced, especially if you're not seeing your story in that smaller group. And, and I say this, I kind of have this weird, complicated kind of one foot in either side of it, because like, it's literally my book that was adapted into Simon, and Simon is very like me in certain ways, like I gave that kid my birthday, like I do like Oreos that much, But I think I talked before a little bit about just like, it's a very different experience, kind of the radio silence around my sapphic books when it comes to kind of the prospect of adaptation. And obviously that's not universal. I am hoping that we're all going to come out and support Cleat Cute, for example. Like, it is like very, very important for us. But this is an adaptation of the book Cleat Cute that is, I believe, in development. I'm not sure if it started filming yet, but this is a sapphic book. It is really exciting. It's not one of mine, but like really, really exciting. Yeah, so I don't want to say that it's like impossible for a sapphic book to get made. And I don't know like kind of what kinds of conversations go into that. And it could just be that like my particular sapphic books are not right for that person's vision, right? Like holding a lot of space for kind of, this is a very, very competitive industry, and it's like a miracle to get anything made in general. But yeah, it does like suck a little bit when I think about the fact that like of my books, the ones that most resemble my experience, not only are they not going to be made, but it's like I know going into it that there's no chance in hell that anybody would make them. I have been making the choice, my last couple books are sapphic. My next one, I have an unannounced sapphic book. And I'm writing these books knowing that, like, there's a ceiling to how popular they're going to get, right? That's not the worst problem a person in the queer community is facing right now. It's just, like, one of those things that kind of sucks a little bit, So I kind of, I look to that feeling, to remind myself, it does really wear on you when you see your own experiences excluded from these mainstream spaces again and again and again. And even when it's something that on paper maybe should seem like your experience, it just isn't clicking. It doesn't resonate. I feel that. I understand that. I think where it gets tricky is, it's harder to critique an industry. It's harder to critique broad cultural trends in kind of what consumers are gravitating toward and what, cultural and political forces underlie that. That's like, it's hard to grasp onto. So it is a lot easier to be like, red, white, and royal blue. Like, we just had Heartstopper and we just had Love, Simon, and like, and they're all written by straight women. Like, of course. To be clear to anybody who is like half listening, no, none of those are written by I'm not going to be a part of that.
I want to say thank you again to Becky and to Savvy for collaborating with me for this video, and thank you again to my Patreon supporters who got my first full interview with Becky way back toward the beginning of this month, and who I've been telling about this video practically all year. Like Becky, I'm honored to be able to have a place in conversations like this at all. And I want to be clear in my closing here that while I love this journey for her, where the sapphic books are primarily what has caught her interest when she writes, I would not think Becky had any less of a right to write about gay men than anybody else did if that was ever where her fancy was led again. If you take one thing from this video, I would love for it to be that we just don't have to keep doing this. We can analyze whether or not the people who are telling queer stories seem to be doing so respectfully, and that can be the extent of our analysis in terms of whether or not they are on our side. Don't be weird to Rachel Reed. Don't be weird to actors who play gay characters in media. Don't be weird to Becky Albertalli, because, like, seriously, now I know her, and I will swing. I think the very concept of women fixating on male characters is a bit too big of a concept for me to have addressed much more fully in this video than I already did, but it's another thing I've got percolating in my brain. If you're interested in the other things that I've got percolating, or in dropping me a few bucks to help me keep doing this kind of work, you can check out the Patreon linked in my description below, or a GoFundMe that I had to launch because sometimes this does not exactly cover my rent and my bills, and by sometimes I mean most months. But this is the work I am able to do, and it is the work I really love doing. And I know Becky Albertalli also really loves the work that she does. One of my favorite things in hearing you speak in other interviews, even before speaking to you, and in our conversations, is I really love how much you love books. I love how excited you are about what is going on in this space that you're in. I have loved how far out of your way I feel like I've seen you go to like reference other authors and bring other queer authors up along with you. I think it's really, really wonderful, and I just thought maybe a nice way to kind of wrap up here would be to ask you, like, who's writing things in this queer YA space right now that you're excited about? Like, who do you think viewers should check out?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah. Born for discussion. All right. Well, I feel like I'm gonna do this again because I'm like on a one-woman mission to like spread the good news of Edward Underhill. His most recent book is not actually YA, but it is like, I do feel like there's some crossover appeal. I want to say it's called House of Now and Then. I hope I'm not messing up the title, but Edward Underhill, everything he's ever written is so like spot on, so good. He has this like kind of rhythmic quality to his writing. I just like, I like look at his books on my shelf sometimes and I'm like, those are, yeah, like those are some good books. I mean, I do feel like everybody should be reading Leah Johnson, who has written like across age categories, can personally vouch for the like pitch perfect, like funny, like voicey storytelling that like, the YA is like perfect YA. The middle grade is like perfect middle grade. Gosh, there's like, I have so many favorite authors, and I'm trying to think of like what is out now too, because sometimes I'll read them early. I'm a forever fan of like Adib Khorram, who has written like a whole bunch of YA books and has also written some romance too. Like actually a lot of my favorite authors have like straddled different like age categories, but yeah, Adib's books always perfect. Julian Winter's books are always perfect. Sophie Gonzalez has written a lot of different kinds of pairings, and her next book, which is not out yet, is actually a like fantasy, it's like a romantasy book. I have read it. It's so good. I know that like if you're one of my readers, you might not like think of yourself as a fantasy reader, but like if you are a Sophie Gonzalez fan, which you should be, do not skip this one. This Wild Wanting, it comes, actually, I'm like, when does it come out? It comes out on November 17th because that's my birthday. Gosh, this is like, okay, these are not YA, but the Amy Spalding Out in Hollywood series, I love, like, devoured every single one of them. Yeah, Laura Gao, who, if you like graphic novels, I mean, Mason Deaver, we got like, but there's shit, I could go on for a really long time. So, can I also plug? All right. So I know if you are familiar with YA, if you're like deep into YA, you know Aiden Thomas. Like Aiden Thomas is a legend, best known for Cemetery Boys. I am a huge ongoing Aiden Thomas fan, but I just want to put out there too that Aiden Thomas signed some swag for some of my kids' friends and like made their day today. So you should be like very confident that these books that you already love are written by a person who is so lovely. Like, I could keep going. I'm like, I might just have to like circle back. Yet, like reason number like 5 bazillion that I'm like grateful to all of these authors for, you know, like keeping me so well fed is like, you know, my alternative, I think like my default these days is doom scrolling. And, you know, and I mean, I do feel like it's important for me to stay informed, but, you know, I feel like these books that I'm reading really do energize me and make me feel like recharged and ready to like fight another day, you know? I don't think it's wrong as a reader too, if you are seeking the kind of specificity of kind of an experience that feels like yours. It's maybe written by somebody whose lived experience is more similar to yours. Like I think that makes sense. I don't think it's bad of you as a reader to want that. And I think, you know, one of the things that's been exciting about the last couple years in particular, maybe the last decade or so in YA, certainly, is that kind of the authors creating these books, the own voices authors, despite every obstacle, and there have been many, especially in the last couple of years, but are still like writing these stories, are still creating new work, and are doing that from a very like sincere place. And I'm guessing a lot of times that book you're looking for that like is gonna resonate more than Simon or whichever one, like that book you're looking for may be right there, you know?
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think people can also write their own books. Like, and that sounds really dismissive when I say it that way, but like I mean it really sincerely. Like if people are feeling like there is an experience that they really, really wish that they could see reflected on paper, like it is very fun to be able to go back and read something that you yourself wrote and that like you know you're gonna get enjoyment out of. Like it, even if you're not writing something with the intention of like I'm gonna publish this and this is gonna have a great message to the world, like if you just want to read about a gay woman who is like you in some specific ways, you are 100% completely allowed to just write that. You can just open up a document and play around, and it could be really fun.
If you were a straight woman and you just really want to write about a gay woman and like really explore that, but just like as an ally and stuff, like I'll catch you in a few years and we'll talk.
Thank you so much for being here. This was absolutely incredible. I'm so happy to know you. I'm so happy to have a chance to get to talk to you. So happy to see your beautiful kitty cat. Where can people find you?
Sorry. Under the cat is where you can always find me. But the best place to find me is definitely Instagram. That's the one that I run myself. So it's just Becky Albertalli, one word. And yeah, I guess I am not great about posting, but I really do like, you know, if I catch a comment, I love to be able to reply and interact. You can also kind of find me in the comment section sometimes of your videos. You can find me playing Cozy Florist. I'm like a really big time florist in my server. But I refuse to pay for it. But yeah, that's where you can find me.